Hello and welcome back to another episode from Driving Britain. Today's episode we're going to be looking at the Titanic. Well, we're going to be looking at a video about the Titanic at least. The video that we're going to be looking at is called The Truth About the Titanic, and it's talking about why the ship sank. Now I know what you're thinking. An iceberg, everybody knows that. Where have you been for the past 100 years? Yep, that's right, it did kind of hit the iceberg. But that's not what we're talking about. As everybody knows, there's always been a bit of a conspiracy that's surrounding why the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, sank. It had built-in chambers with lockable hatches so that it could run into things like icebergs and it not sink the whole ship. It might flood one or two chambers, but it wouldn't sink the whole lot. But that's exactly what happened. Somehow you managed to gouge all the way down the ship with ice, which is, it's a strong substance when it's whacking into the side of a ship. Gouging open a ship, that's not a new thing, that does happen. But the amount of damage that it caused, even by today's standards, that's still a pretty dramatic thing to have happened, and not what anybody would have expected. Some of the conspiracies that run around why the Titanic sank, saying that a lot of pig iron was used in the construction. So by pig iron I mean just low quality, not very good iron. Saying that the type of iron that was used, or the quality of iron in the frigid water, become a lot more brittle, which caused it to fracture and tear open and break apart a lot more than stretch and all the other things that you would have expected to have happened. But over the past 5 or 6 years there's been a little bit more weight put behind a different theory, and that theory is fire. Now nobody's saying that it hit the iceberg, caught on fire and sank. From what I can gather, their claims are a fire happened sometime before it hit the iceberg, and that massively, in some way, somehow, contributed towards the ship sinking. And if it hadn't been for the fire, then the ship just wouldn't have sank. It would have impacted onto the iceberg, tore open one or maybe two chambers, and been a really big issue and scary stuff, but not caused it to sink and kill most of the people on board. So let's go into the video and see what they've got to say, because I don't know anything more about it than what I've just told you. Over the past few years I've heard kind of murmurings about what people have been thinking could have been the cause, but I've never heard or seen any actual kind of real substance or proof behind it. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with, because it's a pretty random thing to pop up with, and I'm not really sure where its origins are. I don't know who started the idea or the thought or the rumour or whatever you want to call it. I just know that it's kind of been gaining more and more speed and a little bit more traction over the past, well, more recently at least, over the past couple of years, and then recently it's kind of bloomed a lot more for some reason.
Scientists finally reveal the truth about the Titanic.
Before the video goes any further, I know that most people do know about the Titanic, they know the story, but I also know that especially the younger generations perhaps don't. The Titanic was a massive passenger ship that was sailing between the UK through to the US. Halfway across the ocean, through bad weather, bad visibility, going too fast, all sorts of different reasons, managed to run into an iceberg which gouged a big hole down the side and the ship sank. The reason why so many people died on it is because they didn't put very many lifeboats on there, and most of the lifeboats that were on it didn't get filled up. So as soon as there was a problem, a lot of the people on board were kind of doomed. They had very limited options, like none. There were ships heading towards them, but the temperature of the water and being able to bob around in there for a while, really not good odds.
At 882 feet 9 inches long, 92 feet wide, 175 feet tall, and with a usable volume of 46,328 tons, the Titanic seemed indestructible. People could walk for miles along her myriad passages.
Look at the size of the people compared to all of it. I was going to say the propeller, but just look at the size of that. Imagine standing on the dock looking up at that, especially back in the day when all this was actually happening. Nowadays it'll probably be dwarfed by some of the current vessels on the ocean, but back then that's going to be such an awesome sight, isn't it?
And decks. Even the ship's officers needed over 2 weeks to remember their way around this huge construction. The Titanic had 4 massive smokestacks. Each of them weighed 60 tons, and they extended 81.5 feet above the deck. Such an impressive height was necessary to avoid covering the passengers in 100 tons of soot blown off daily. The smokestacks were placed at a 30-degree angle to look even more astonishing and imposing. No less awe-inspiring was the cost of the ship. Its construction demanded $7.5 million. If we take into account modern exchange rates and inflation, in 2016 they would be paying $166 million. Surprisingly, it would turn out cheaper than the production of the world-famous movie Titanic in 1997, which cost $200 million.
That's pretty bizarre, isn't it? It costs more to make a film than what it cost to make the Titanic itself. That seems like almost madness, that does. Now, they made so much money from the film, you can see why they invested so much, but they couldn't have known when they was making it just how much money they would have made, or how kind of record-breaking it would be for a matter of weeks in the film charts and stuff like that. That's quite a big investment, wasn't it? But as far as the actual building of the ship went, back in that day, trying to recoup that amount of money, it would have had to do a lot of nautical miles to get that sort of amount of money back, wouldn't it? Even at the prices they were probably charging for the first and second class tickets, which I guess was probably quite a lot. But even so, that seems like a lot of money.
Harland and Wolff Shipyard took on 3,000 men to build the ship. Even with a huge labor force working 6 days a week from 6 in the morning, it still took 26 months to complete the monumental task. It was a difficult and dangerous work. Imagine doing something at the height of a 20-story building with no safety ropes. But these people needed money to support their families. The builders got £2 a week, which doesn't sound like much, but it was a competitive wage back then. Unfortunately, 8 people died during the building process, and 246 were injured. So it's really hard to fathom that.
I've actually been to that shipyard, because that's where the Titanic Museum is in Ireland. But as far as I remember, I don't remember seeing anything that was an actual artefact from the Titanic on there. Now, it is the biggest, the most famous Titanic museum that there is, because it's on the shipyard where the Titanic was built. And I do remember seeing some White Star Line crockery and things like that, and the actual museum's quite impressive and stuff. But I don't remember seeing anything that was actually from the Titanic, and I know that they've bought an awful lot of stuff from the Titanic up. If anybody's been to the museum and they saw something that they know was actually definitely from the Titanic, or if you're from the museum, then add to the comment section what parts, what artefacts. Because what the White Star Line crockery that I do remember seeing in the museum was used across all of their ships. In fact, I think you can still buy it now on eBay. But you'd think that the main museum for the Titanic would have at least one thing in there, or at least, well, you would have thought the most impressive things really. But just one thing, that probably would be a good start. But I really don't remember seeing any actual artefact. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I'm sure that you will, but I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, because I'd really like to believe that there is something genuine in there.
Such a complicated mechanism, with all the work, effort, and money spent on its creation, could just sink because of one iceberg. Well, new findings give us reason to believe that the original cause of the catastrophe was not ice, but fire. Journalist Sana Maloney has been studying the fate of the Titanic for more than 30 years. It was he who discovered a huge 30-foot-long black spot on the hull of the ship. He noticed it after examining a photo taken before Titanic's departure. The journalist got hold of an album of previously unpublished photographs that showed the construction of the ship and the preparations for her first and last journey. The fire had to have been burning for 3 weeks at a very high temperature before somebody noticed it. Metallurgy experts are sure that.
How can a fire on a ship be burning for 3 weeks before somebody's even noticed it? And I'm pretty sure that coal dust is pretty flammable, isn't it? Isn't it like when you blow creamer in the air into a flame and you get the big fireball? I thought you get a souped up version of that from coal dust. I thought that was one of the big dangers with the mines. Getting, kind of a flashover from the dust. I'm sure that one of the chimneys, the last chimney on the Titanic, I'm sure that it wasn't a chimney used for putting out steam or anything like that. It was the chute for getting the coal into the ship. And it made the whole thing look more impressive. But it was used as the chute to get the coal into the ship, and there were massive chambers inside. If one of those chambers has caught fire, how can somebody not notice that that's happened for 3 weeks?
Such conditions could have easily weakened the metal, reducing its strength by as much as 75%. That's why the iceberg didn't have any problems tearing a hole in the side of the ship. If not for the fire, it would have been impossible. But the fact
if anybody's seen footage of tower blocks catching fire and stuff like that, and then they've consequently collapsed because of it, it's usually not that far into it before the metal heats up that much that it weakens and becomes so weak that it can no longer hold the building up, and then the building ends up toppling and falling over because the metal becomes superheated. We've seen that quite a few times over the years. It doesn't happen very often, and I'm sure that there's certain conditions that make it happen or not happen, but because we know that that does happen and we know that it does weaken the metal, then if there really is photo evidence that a fire was there, and it, because of the size of the fire and the amount of damage that you can see evident, shows that it must have been burning for at least a couple of weeks, so that you're talking about real significant damage. Buildings don't stand up for that long when they catch fire before they end up collapsing. Then that seems like quite a reasonable way to explain what happened.
The fact that the iceberg hit exactly the spot with the compromised metal is one of the incredible links in the chain of the Titanic's tragic what-ifs. The management of the project knew about the fire and the fact that the ship shouldn't have set off on that fateful voyage. But it would have meant bankruptcy for the ship's owners.
I'm not really much into boating or anything, but I know that one thing that you don't want on a ship when you're out at sea is a fire. Because you tend to be kind of surrounded by, well, the thing that's going to put the fire out, sure. But then you've got a very long swim to anywhere. UK to the US, that's days, that is. That's one of the biggest crossings that you can do in a ship. You don't set out with a fire on your ship, especially a coal fire. They're not even saying that it was burning for 3 weeks before somebody noticed it and then they tried to kind of hide it and pretend it wasn't happening. But they put it out and it caused a problem, but they'd put it out, it was all good. We're just going to carry on, not knowing that it had weakened the metal. It's saying that it was still burning when they set sail with all the people on board. That's just madness, that is.
The thing is that at the time, miners all over the country were on strike, so there was no coal to sustain the Titanic. But the tickets had already been sold out, and other ships had been cancelled since everybody wanted to be the first to sail on the largest ship known to mankind. That's why the owners of the Titanic bought all the coal they could find, and even the coal from other ships. Cancelling the trip seemed out of the question. So
I knew that there'd been some talk about strikes and stuff at the time, but I didn't realise that they had to actually buy the coal to sail from other ships. They must have been wondering if they could even get enough coal on board to set sail. Such a big project, so many influential people on board, and they didn't even have enough coal, or almost didn't have enough coal to even set sail. There's so many things about this just make it look like they were just about kind of reaching each stage just in time enough to be able to kind of progress to the next bit. It's not sounding good, is it?
So, to conceal the truth, the ship was turned in such a way that the marks from the fire faced away from the docks toward the sea. Therefore, the passengers couldn't see them.
Make people feel too good, would it?
Thus,
you're a first-class passenger, you're probably one of half a dozen people that rule countries going on the most famous ship out, and you walk up to the ship, the first thing that you see is at the side of it smouldering from where they've got a 3-week-old fire. Yeah, it's not really the best image. I can see why they'd want to park it the other way around.
The journey began. There were no binoculars. Why is this fact worth mentioning? Because having binoculars could have saved the Titanic. Here is another tragic coincidence in the chain of unfortunate events. There were no sonar systems in those times, so to detect threats ahead of a liner, special people kept watch using binoculars. But the binoculars on the Titanic had been locked away in a special compartment. The only person with the key to the locker, Second Officer David Blair, was replaced at the last minute. He was in such a hurry to leave the ship that he forgot to hand the key over to his replacement. This fateful forgetfulness was discovered only 3 days later when the ship was already at sea.
So one of the most expensive ships ever built, or at least at the time, or the most expensive, the most elaborate, biggest piece of engineering, biggest ship, all the rest of it, and I've only got one pair of binoculars on board, and even then I've only got one key, and they've locked them away. the Titanic and they've only got one pair of binoculars. It's just doomed from the moment they even thought of building the Titanic, wasn't it?
If the crew had gotten the binoculars, they would have noticed the iceberg earlier and would have just enough time to avoid the crash.
Yeah, I thought that the reason why they didn't see the iceberg was because of poor visibility, because of sea mist and stuff like that. Not because they hadn't even got any binoculars.
Perhaps the crash could also been avoided if the ship hadn't been breaking the speed limit. They were falling behind schedule, and this was unacceptable as it could ruin the Titanic's reputation. That's why the ship was moving at a speed much higher than the one it was designed for. Another criminal negligence was connected with the lifeboats.
The captain of the Titanic, he was White Star Line, who built the ship. He was their kind of top man, and all of their new vessels, their biggest and their best, he somehow managed to get himself into a position where he was always the first one to take that new ship out, and that's why he ended up on the Titanic, is because he was the equivalent of, like, the best pilot that they've got, the most famous. But that may have led to him kind of believing a little bit of his own hype.
In order to contain all the people on board, the Titanic needed about 60 lifeboats. The chief designer, Alexander Carlisle, planned to equip the ship with only 48 boats, but eventually the number was reduced even more to 20. This was done purely for cosmetic reasons, since the deck looked too cluttered with 48. These 20 boats could seat only 1/3 of all the people on the ship. Surprisingly, such a hugely insufficient amount of lifeboats was technically legal. According to the laws of that time, the number of boats depended not on the number of passengers, but on the tonnage of a ship.
Well, that's a stupid way to do it. Why would they? Surely it should be based around the amount of people that's likely to be on it, not by how much it weighs, because there's all sorts of things that could affect the ship's tonnage. But the only thing that affects how many people are going to be on board is how many tickets they're going to sell. Especially back then, because if it's got 100 rooms, that doesn't mean say they're going to sell 100 tickets. They're just going to cram people in tighter and tighter until they think they can't fit anymore. It should have always been based on how many people, not by the tonnage. I know why it was based on the tonnage, and it's because of it all being commercial vessels and that sort of stuff. It was based around that, but still.
What's more, at the time of the Titanic's construction, lifeboat drills were standard practice on ocean liners. This way, the crew could prepare passengers for an emergency should it occur. But this type of drill never took place on the Titanic. Captain Edward John Smith canceled the drill scheduled on the morning of the day the Titanic sank. Nobody knows the reasons for his decision, especially
Yeah, I think that because he was always the first to take out the new ships and seen as the golden boy, I think that he might have started to get a little. Well, it makes it look like, at least, that he was a bit arrogant with it, and that no matter what anybody else said, he would do what he wanted to do. He would put the ship faster than it was supposed to go. If he thought that it was going to make it look bad to run drills for putting out the lifeboats, why would you need lifeboats on an unsinkable ship type idea? Then I can easily see him throwing safety away in the place of kind of keeping his stiff upper lip type scenario, much to everybody's peril.
Considering the fact that other ships had been passing on warnings about ice in the water in that vicinity. Perhaps this is why it took the crew over a half an hour to launch the lifeboats instead of the standard 10 minutes. Some people also blame Captain Smith for allowing the first.
They should have had those drills before the passengers were anywhere near the ship, so they could have run them, they could have got it down to a T and know that they can get everybody off the ship if they really needed to, before any member of public got anywhere near the ship. Even back then, I know they were going on about health and safety now, and it's a lot different, a lot better now than what it was back then. But people weren't stupid back then. They still knew that they needed to do that sort of stuff. They knew that they needed to be able to do that sort of stuff. So why was it just not done with this? Every single thing that you hear about the construction and sailing of the Titanic, it just seems to be problem after problem and mistake after mistake. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure we're just hearing all the bad bits. There seems to be a lot of them though, don't there?
First batch of lifeboats to leave half empty. The first boat with 65 seats contained just 27 passengers. Why weren't they packed full? In the beginning, people were reluctant to leave the ship and didn't realize that they were in grave danger. In 2012, researchers found out that Captain Smith had failed his first exam in navigation. Eventually he passed, but who knows? Maybe this too played its own role in the disaster.
I'm not sure how much to read into that because, like I say, I'm sure that he was their golden boy. He was the one that took out all the brand new ships. He was always the first to sail them. He was the one that was going to be sailing the Titanic because he was the obvious choice for the company, because he's the one that would have taken out every other big ship. The fact that they've got him down as failing a navigation thing, I don't know, maybe he did. Wouldn't surprise me. But as far as actual sailing ships go, I'm sure that he had a crash with a different ship before, didn't he? If anybody knows, add it to the comment section, but I've got a bit of a memory that he crashed another ship just before he got onto the Titanic. In fact, I think that is it the Olympus, the sister ship to the Titanic. I've got a feeling that he took that out, crashed it, and then ended up sailing the Titanic. But the Olympus was supposed to be the first one out, and it was, but it had to come back. I've just got a memory that he crashed it and it had to return to the dock for repairs, and so the Titanic was the first one off the slip, so to speak. If that's true, then add it to the comments. If it's not true, then let me know.
As the Titanic was sinking,
have just seen it on
the
Scooby-Doo.
crew sent several distress signals. However, a ship sailing nearby, the Californian, ignored the emergency flare shot in the sky. The captain of the Californian later lost his job after this fact came out. But modern researchers have managed to prove his innocence. Well, better late than never. The reason nobody noticed the signals from the Titanic could be due to the phenomenon of light refraction. When layers of cold air are positioned below layers of warmer air, it causes thermal inversion. Thermal inversion, in turn, leads to the light refracting abnormally. In short, all this creates mirages, and such mirages had been recorded by several other ships sailing in that area. Historian Tim Malton is also convinced that light refraction that night could be the reason why the lookouts missed the iceberg completely. Criminal negligence, tragic and...
I don't know, I'm not sure I buy into that. We're on about fireworks going off in the sky, flares going off in the sky, they're pretty distinctive. That's a completely different sort of thing to see compared to any type of photoluminescence or refraction or anything like that. You know, when you see on films mirages of hotels appearing across the desert, it's not like that. That's not really how it works. So I don't think that I buy into that they didn't see it because of refraction and things like that. I think that they just either wasn't looking or they ignored it. I don't think they would intentionally ignore it, so I'd think that they just didn't see it for some reason. I'm not sure why, but that's what I personally think.
An unfortunate chain of coincidences, fire or ice,
I don't mean because of
whatever
refraction.
it was, it took the lives of hundreds of people and still keeps the minds of scientists busy to this day. What theory about the catastrophe do you believe? Share your opinion in the comments below. If we've opened your eyes to one of the mysteries you've been puzzling over, give us a thumbs up. If this video...
Okay, their video that we've been watching is from Brightside, links in description, and as always, I encourage you to go and subscribe. Yes, what do you think? We've seen quite a few things. I think because there's photo evidence that there was a fire, the idea that you can tell from an old black and white image that didn't look to be in the best quality when they showed us, when they kind of zoomed into it on the screen, I'm not sure that you can conclusively say, oh, that's been burning for 3 weeks. I think that's quite opinion based rather than firmly scientifically based. But the bottom line is there's evidence of a fire. The ship still sailed even though they knew that there was a fire on board. They just ignored it and sailed anyway. I think that seems a very surprising thing, because I don't know how the chambers were set up that held the coal, but I would have thought that if one of them was burning, that would have some type of knock-on effect on the others. Now by burning, I guess they mean more of a hot charcoal smouldering like your barbecue rather than active flames licking around the side of the ship. But all the same, I would have thought that if some coal was burning, you would expect that to have a knock-on effect on the chambers either side of it, and also just the fumes and the smoke and all the rest of it. So I don't know that they could sail with it burning and it not be noticed. I know you got a lot of smoke and soot and stuff coming out the top anyway because you've got 3 big chimneys, 3 active chimneys. I'm not sure. Put in the comment section what you think. If you think it's a realistic idea, if you think that that would have been enough to compromise the sides enough for the iceberg to have gouged into the side the way that it did, or if you think there's something else to it, or do you think that it was just everything was all good, the steel and the iron was all good, there wasn't any fires, everything was fine, it's just simply that it crashed into an iceberg, which is a massive chunk of mass to whack into, with sharp bits which were enough to gouge through the steel, especially in those cold temperatures. Let us know in the comment section what you think. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next time.